The late morning sun filtered through the tall glass windows of the Seabreeze diner, filling the room with warm daylight that softened the chrome edges and made the yellow booths shine like polished gold. It looked like an ordinary day, but for Aria Maynard, it was another quiet battle she was trying to survive. She wiped the counter for the fourth time that hour, not because it needed cleaning, but because her hands needed something to do when her heart carried too much weight. She hadn't slept well in weeks. The bills were mounting, her mother's medical treatments were overdue, and every minute she worked here felt like standing between hope and disaster with nothing but her apron to protect her. She thought today would be just another day of rushing orders and weak smiles, until the moment three sharply dressed men walked in, laughing loudly, as if the world itself existed to entertain them. She didn't know it yet, but the next hour would change her life in ways she never imagined. If you believe kindness and second chances still matter, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Kindness Corner. And tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? The men seated themselves at a booth by the window, sunlight casting sharp edges on their expensive suits. They looked out of place in the cozy diner, three polished executives who carried the confidence of people used to getting what they wanted without being questioned. Aria approached their table with a steady but cautious posture, holding her notepad tightly against her chest like a shield. She tried not to let the ache in her stomach distract her. She had skipped breakfast again to stretch what remained of her groceries. When she reached them, she offered the same gentle smile she gave every customer, hoping it would be enough to hold her world together for another day. But as the trio ordered the most expensive items on the menu with careless amusement, she could sense the storm brewing behind their smirks. She just didn't know how strong it would become. By noon, the diner was busier, sunlight shifting across the checkered tiles as people came and went, leaving behind crumbs, laughter, and stories Aria didn't have the luxury to listen to. She served coffee refills and wiped tables with movements that had grown mechanical over months of exhaustion. When the three wealthy men finally finished their meal, Aria approached them with the receipt in hand, her apron already stained with coffee and spilled milkshakes. Their plates were wiped clean, evidence of how well they had eaten, far better than she had in days. But the moment she placed the bill on the table, the air changed. Their expressions shifted from amused to something colder, something sharper. She could feel their eyes on her like a mocking glare. She stood as tall as she could, holding the receipt between her fingers as one of the men leaned back and waved her away with a casual flick of his wrist, dismissing her like she was nothing more than background noise. Another laughed outright, pointing at her apron as if her hard work was something worth ridiculing. The third leaned forward just enough for his words to sting, his smile carrying the same arrogance as a man who thought the world could never deny him anything. Aria felt the heat rise behind her eyes, but she swallowed it down. She reminded herself she needed this job, needed the paycheck, needed whatever dignity she could salvage. She could not afford to cry, not here, not now. The laughter grew louder. The men made a spectacle out of refusing to pay, pointing at her as if she were the joke of the day. Aria gripped the receipt tighter, her knuckles widening, but her voice stayed calm, too calm, considering the humiliation burning inside her. Other customers glanced over, whispering, unsure whether to step in or stay back. She felt like the entire diner was watching her sink. There were moments in life when loneliness felt like a shadow, but today it felt like a heavy cloak that tightened around her chest. She wished for someone, anyone, to stand beside her, but she had learned a long time ago that sometimes people watched quietly when the world felt cruel. But then, something shifted in the atmosphere. Aria didn't notice it at first, too focused on trying to remain composed, but she sensed a presence behind the men, a silence that felt different, steadier, stronger. At the far end of the diner, near the counter, a tall figure paused mid-step, observing the scene with a sharp, unreadable gaze. His suit was deep navy, perfectly tailored, his silver hair brushed back with the effortless dignity of someone who never needed to prove himself. This was Rowan Hale, the billionaire owner of the diner chain, though almost no one recognized him because he preferred moving quietly, observing his businesses without attention drawn to his wealth. Today, however, fate placed him here at precisely the moment Aria needed someone most. Rowan watched the scene unfold with a level of disappointment that tightened his jaw. He wasn't a man easily angered, life had taught him patience, and success had taught him humility. But seeing an employee, someone who worked tirelessly to keep his establishment alive, be mocked by men who treated kindness like weakness stirred something deeper in him. He stepped closer, his shoes barely making a sound on the polished floor, but his presence carried the weight of authority, enough to silence the air around him. Arya finally sensed movement and looked up, surprise flickering in her eyes as she noticed the well-dressed man standing behind the trio. She didn't know who he was, but something in his expression gave her the smallest breath of relief, a reminder that the world wasn't always cruel. Rowan's gaze stayed fixed on the three men, who hadn't yet realized someone stood behind them, witnessing every callous laugh, every degrading gesture. The customers nearby leaned in, sensing the shift in power, as if justice itself had quietly stepped into the room. When the men finally noticed Rowan standing there, their laughter died in their throats. Their smirks faded as they straightened in awkward surprise, suddenly aware that someone far more important than they realized had been watching. Rowan didn't raise his voice, he didn't need to. The disappointment in his eyes was enough to make even arrogant men shrink. For a moment, the diner fell completely silent, the sunlight catching the edges of the scene like a spotlight revealing truth. Arya felt her lungs finally expand as if she could breathe again for the first time in minutes. What followed was a moment the diner staff would talk about for weeks. Rowan's attention shifted to Arya, offering her a small, reassuring nod, the kind that conveyed respect rather than sympathy. It was the quiet acknowledgement she had never received from strangers before, the silent promise that someone finally saw her struggle. The three wealthy men fumbled for their wallets, their arrogance crumbling as quickly as it had risen. They paid, not just for the meal, but with an extra amount that resembled guilt more than generosity. When they left, the diner felt lighter, quieter, and Arya felt a tremor in her chest, a strange mix of relief and disbelief. Rowan approached her gently, and though he spoke with calm professionalism, there was genuine care in his expression. He asked if she was all right, commending her patience in a way that made her eyes sting again, but this time with warmth. Arya nodded, unsure how to process the sudden shift in her day. She didn't know that Rowan would later call the manager to discuss improving working conditions, or that he would personally check in on her family's situation after learning about her hardships. She didn't know that this moment, this small spark of unexpected kindness, would alter the course of her life forever. Sometimes, the world gives us a glimpse of the goodness we forgot to hope for. Sometimes, a stranger steps in at the moment we feel most invisible, reminding us that our worth isn't determined by the people who try to diminish it. For Arya, that day became the beginning of a quiet transformation, proof that even in the brightest daylight, miracles could appear in the simplest forms, a nod, a presence, a helping hand. If this story touched your heart even a little, please like, share, and subscribe to Kindness Corner. Your support keeps these stories alive. Before you go, tell us in the comments, what part of the story moved you the most?